Thunder crashes as blood stains the rain-soaked doorstep of Sarah Miller's suburban home. Before her stands a desperate pregnant woman, barefoot and trembling, clutching a wound on her arm. "Please," the stranger whispers, her accent betraying noble origins. "They'll kill my baby." In this moment of crisis, Sarah makes a decision that will plunge her into a world of deadly palace intrigue and royal betrayal. Her mysterious guest is Princess Elena of Valdoria, carrying not just an unborn heir, but evidence of a conspiracy that reaches the highest towers of power. As armed men in black SUVs prowl the storm-dark streets, these two women from different worlds forge a bond that will shake a monarchy to its core. But in a game where crowns and lives hang in the balance, can a simple act of kindness survive? The cruel machinations of power? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she pressed a clean cloth against the wound on Elena's arm. The stranger had collapsed into her foyer, leaving a trail of rainwater and blood on the hardwood floor. Without hesitation, Sarah retrieved her grandmother's antique medical kit from beneath the kitchen sink. A worn leather case containing modern supplies alongside vintage instruments that had saved lives during World War II. "I'm a nurse," Sarah explained softly, noting how her guest flinched at each rumble of thunder. "This needs stitches, but I can help. Will you let me?" Elena's eyes darted to the windows, where sheets of rain obscured the view of the suburban street. Her hand never left her swollen belly. "They mustn't find me," she whispered, her accent more pronounced in her distress. "Nobody's finding you tonight," Sarah assured her, threading a sterile needle. "My son Tommy's at his father's this weekend. We're alone here." She paused, studying the young woman's face. Despite the dirt and fear, there was something eerily familiar about her features. "I'm Sarah Miller." "Elena," the woman replied after a moment's hesitation. "Just Elena." No last name offered. As Sarah worked on the wound, her trained eye caught other details. Perfectly manicured nails, now chipped and broken, the remnants of expensive perfume beneath the scent of rain and fear, and most tellingly, the callous-free hands of someone unaccustomed to manual labor. This was no ordinary runaway. The wound itself told a story, a clean slice from what must have been a knife, defensive in nature. Someone had tried to grab her, and she had fought back. "You're safe here," Sarah said, finishing the last stitch. "But I need to know, is anyone else in danger? Should I call the police?" "No." Elena's response was instant and panicked. "No police, please. They have influence, connections." She swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. A distant sound made them both freeze, the distinctive whoomp-whoomp of helicopter blades, growing closer. Elena's face went chalk white. Sarah made a quick decision, helping Elena to her feet. "Basement, now!" She grabbed her medical kit and guided her guest down the stairs, mind racing. The basement's small windows were covered by heavy curtains, and the thick concrete walls would help mask body heat from any infrared cameras. They had barely settled in the basement's back room when Sarah's phone buzzed. An emergency alert. Severe weather warning for the greater metropolitan area. All residents advised to seek shelter immediately. But Sarah knew the helicopter sounds weren't from weather surveillance. The rhythmic beat was military grade, and it was conducting a search pattern. She helped Elena onto the old couch, wrapping her in a blanket before retrieving bottled water and energy bars from her emergency supplies. As she moved around the basement, Sarah's mind catalogued resources and options. The medical kit could handle most emergencies. The basement had a separate exit to the backyard if needed. Her brother James, ex-military with connections, lived an hour away. A pearl necklace had fallen from Elena's coat during the move downstairs. Sarah picked it up now, studying the exquisite craftsmanship. One pearl was stained with blood, and the clasp was broken, recently broken, Given the clean snap of the metal, Elena's eyes fixed on the necklace. "My mother's," she whispered, "given to her by the Queen of England herself." Her hand flew to her mouth, as if she'd said too much. But Sarah was already putting the pieces together. The accent, the poise, the helicopters, the expensive necklace, and now a royal connection. The strange news reports she'd seen last week about unrest in the small European nation of Valdoria. Before she could pursue that thought, headlights swept across the high basement windows. A vehicle was pulling into her driveway. Through the curtains, she caught a glimpse of a black SUV with darkened windows. Sarah moved silently to Elena's side, placing a finger to her lips. The pregnant woman nodded, terrified but composed. Above them, heavy, footsteps crossed the porch. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. Sarah's heart pounded, but she remained still. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated. The SUV's engine growled to life, then faded into the storm. "They'll be back," Elena said quietly. "They always come back." Sarah nodded, mind, already planning their next move. "Then we'll be gone before they do." She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to her brother. "Need help. Emergency. Bring the kit." The storm raged on above them, but in the basement of her suburban home, Sarah Miller had already committed to protecting this mysterious woman and her unborn child, whatever the cost. Dawn crept through the basement windows, the storm finally subsiding. Sarah had dozed fitfully on an old armchair, while Elena slept on the couch, one hand protectively cradling her belly. The morning light revealed dark circles under the young woman's eyes, and a grace in her bearing that even exhaustion couldn't diminish. The buzz of Sarah's phone jolted them both awake. A text from her son Tommy. "Coming home early. Dad's meeting cancelled. Be there in 30. Elena struggled to sit up, panic flashing across her face. "I should go. I've put you in enough. Danger already." "You're not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly, helping her guest steady herself. "My son Tommy's 13 and more trustworthy than most adults I know. But first—" She pulled out a small thumb drive that had fallen from Elena's coat while she slept. "I think it's time you told me what's on this." Elena's hand flew to her pocket, then to her throat, where the pearl necklace had been. For a moment, she looked like she might bolt, but then her shoulders sagged. "It's proof," she whispered, "of corruption that goes to the heart of the Valdorian throne." Sarah nodded slowly. "And you're not just any Elena, are you? You're Elena Rousseau, Crown Princess of Valdoria." "Former Crown Princess," Elena corrected, bitterly. "The moment I discovered what my uncle and his allies were planning, I became a liability." She pressed her hand to her stomach. "We both did." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from above, too early to be Tommy. "Mom, you home?" Tommy's voice called out, but something was wrong. The tone was off, too loud, almost like a warning. Sarah's instincts screamed danger. She grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the back room, just as heavy footsteps descended the basement stairs. "How touching," a man's voice said in accented English. The princess made a friend. They spun to find 2 men in dark suits blocking their path. A third held Tommy by the shoulder, pressing a gun to the boy's side. "Let him go," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's just a child." "Of course," the man smiled coldly. "Once Her Highness comes with us, the royal family is very concerned about her mental state during pregnancy." Elena stepped forward, steel in her spine. "Like you were concerned about my father's mental state before he signed those documents? Or about Minister Kovac before his convenient suicide?" Tommy chose that moment to act. He drove his elbow back into his captor's stomach, just as Sarah had taught him in self-defense classes. The man's grip loosened, and Tommy twisted away. "Run!" Sarah shouted, grabbing a shelf of preserves and pulling it down between them and the intruders. Glass shattered as jars crashed to the floor. They raced through the storage room to the exterior basement door, Sarah punching in the key code with shaking fingers. Behind them, cursing in Valdorian mixed with the sound of pursuit, the door swung open to reveal James, Sarah's brother, combat stance ready and service weapon drawn. "Inside!" he barked at them, moving to cover their escape. Cars running, they sprinted to James's waiting SUV as gunfire erupted behind them. Sarah pushed Elena into the back seat and dove in after her, pulling Tommy close. James appeared seconds later, jumping into the driver's seat and peeling away from the house. "Military-grade weapons," he reported grimly, taking a sharp turn. "Professional. Hit squad, want to tell me why there's a Valdorian wet team after my sister?" "James," Sarah said, checking Tommy for injuries. "Meet Princess Elena of Valdoria. Elena, my brother James, former Special Forces, and apparently still useful in a crisis," James said, watching the rearview mirror. "We're being followed." Elena pulled the thumb drive from her pocket with trembling fingers. "This contains proof of my uncle's conspiracy. The finances, the blackmail, the murders, everything. He plans to force my father to abdicate, but that's just the start. There are weapons deals, connections to terrorist cells." "Later," James cut her off, taking another sharp turn. "First, we need to get somewhere safe. I've got a cabin in the mountains. No one knows about it except Sarah." Sarah met her brother's eyes in the mirror. The cabin was his bug-out location, a secret he'd kept even from his military contacts. Sharing it now meant he was all in. Tommy, still pressed against Sarah's side, spoke up. "Mom, are we in really big trouble?" Sarah hugged him closer, watching. Elena slipped the thumb drive back into a hidden pocket. The princess's face was pale but determined, one hand still protecting her unborn child. "No, honey," Sarah said softly. "We're not in trouble. We're helping someone who needs us. That's what our family does." The SUV sped north toward the mountains as the sun rose over the suburban streets behind them, where 3 black government vehicles still sat in front of Sarah's violated home. In her pocket, the broken pearl necklace seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. James's cabin was more of a fortress than a retreat. Solar panels provided off-grid power, and the basement held enough supplies to last months. While Eleanor rested in one of the spare rooms, Sarah spread her collected newspaper clippings across the kitchen table. "You've been researching," James observed, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Should have known you wouldn't just take in a stranger without digging deeper." Sarah touched a yellowed article from 3 years ago. "Valdorian Crown Prince weds in lavish ceremony." Elena looked radiant in her wedding photo, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes. "Prince Marcus," Sarah said softly. "He died in a car accident 6 months ago, right after Elena became pregnant." "Accident?" James scoffed. "Like those guys at our house were accident investigators?" Tommy appeared in the doorway, clutching his laptop. "Mom, you should see this." He pulled up a news site. "They're saying Princess Elena had a mental breakdown, that she's endangering her baby with delusional paranoia about the royal family." Sarah studied the article's photo of Elena's uncle, Duke Richard, expressing deep concern for his niece's well-being. His sympathetic expression didn't match the cold eyes. "Classic gaslighting," James muttered. "Discredit the witness. Control the narrative." "I'm sorry about Marcus." Elena's voice came from behind them. She stood in the doorway, one hand on her belly. "He discovered the truth first. The weapons deals, the offshore accounts, the planned coup. He tried to protect me by keeping me in the dark, but..." She moved to the table, picking up the wedding photo. "They made it look like brake failure, a tragic accident on a mountain road." Sarah watched tears fall onto the newspaper. "And your father, the king?" "Drugged. Slowly poisoned to make him seem incompetent. Uncle Richard's doctors keep him medicated, isolated. The day I fled, I overheard them discussing how to handle the tragic suicide of a grief-stricken king." Elena's voice broke. "My father signed those transfer documents because he didn't even know what day it was." James swore softly. "And the thumb drive?" Marcus's insurance policy, financial records, surveillance footage, medical reports, everything needed to expose the conspiracy. He hid it in my jewelry box the night before. Elena touched her throat where the pearl necklace had been. The next morning they killed him. Tommy, who had been quietly typing, spoke up. "Mom, look at this." He turned his laptop to show a financial news site. Valdorian Royal Holdings just acquired controlling interest in 3 major defense contractors. The deals were approved last week. Sarah leaned in to read. The acquisitions were worth billions, all fast-tracked through regulatory approval. Duke Richard's preparing for something bigger than just taking the throne. Valdoria's strategic location, James said grimly. Deep water ports, shared borders with 3 NATO countries. If someone wanted to destabilize the region... It's not just Valdoria at stake, Elena finished. My uncle's allies. They have plans, weapon shipments, troop movements disguised as training exercises. Once they control the throne, Valdoria becomes their forward operating base. Sarah gathered the newspaper clippings, mind racing. Every article showed Elena's uncle slowly consolidating power while maintaining a facade of concerned nobility. The pieces had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. A distant drone made them all freeze. James moved to the window, using military-grade binoculars to scan the sky. Surveillance drone, commercial grade, but they're getting closer. They'll find us eventually, Elena said, unconsciously protecting her belly. They always do. Sarah met her brother's eyes. How long to get your contacts in place? 24 hours, maybe less. James was already reaching for his secure phone. But we'll need somewhere to go when we move. Somewhere they won't expect. Tommy looked up from his laptop. What about Mrs. Chen's? Sarah blinked. My patient? The retired ambassador's wife? She's always talking about her diplomatic immunity, Tommy pressed, and her house has that weird tunnel from when it was a prohibition hideout. A smile slowly spread across Sarah's face. Tommy, you're brilliant. She turned to Elena. Mrs. Chen served as Valdorian ambassador to the US 30 years ago. She still has connections, and she owes me a favor for keeping her husband alive. Last year, when his heart acted up, hope flickered in Elena's eyes for the first time since she arrived. A diplomatic residence would have protected status. They couldn't enter without causing an international incident. And Mrs. Chen hosts a weekly bridge club for former ambassadors, Sarah added. Perfect cover for making discreet inquiries. James nodded slowly. It could work. Give me 12 hours to set up a secure route. Sarah gathered the newspapers, pausing. At the wedding photo, Elena and Marcus smiling at a future they thought they had. Now one was dead, and the other was carrying his heir while fleeing for her life. We'll make it right, Sarah promised softly. For Marcus, for your father, for your baby, whatever it takes. Elena touched the photo one last time. Thank you, she whispered, for believing me, for helping when you didn't have to. Outside, the drone's buzz faded into the distance, but they all knew it would be back. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in Valdoria, a king's life hung in the balance, while his brother prepared to tear apart a nation. Sarah carefully folded the wedding photo and handed it to Elena. Sometimes the smallest pieces of paper, a photograph, a news clipping, a birth certificate, could change the course of history. Now they just had to live long enough to prove it. Mrs. Chen's Victorian mansion sat back from the road, sheltered by ancient oaks. Sarah pulled into the curved driveway at exactly 2:47 a.m. when the neighborhood's security patrol was changing. Shifts. James had timed it perfectly. Remember, Sarah whispered as they approached the service entrance. You're Anna, my cousin from Minnesota, pregnant, recently widowed, staying with me while grieving. Elena nodded, adjusting the worn denim, jacket and baseball cap that completed her disguise. Her royal posture was harder to hide than her accent. Mrs. Chen opened the door before they could knock, her tiny frame commanding presence despite her age. Quickly, she said, ushering them inside. The cameras are looped for 3 more minutes. The house was a maze of antique furniture and diplomatic memorabilia. Mrs. Chen led them through the kitchen to a wooden panel that swung open to reveal a narrow staircase. "Prohibition tunnel," she explained, handling the steep steps with practiced ease. "Now it's my wine cellar, diplomatically protected space, sweep for bugs weekly. Your brother's equipment arrived an hour ago." The tunnel opened into a surprisingly modern apartment. James had already set up surveillance monitors and communication gear. 3 burner phones lay on a table, each labeled with a code name. "Cardinal, Sparrow and Dove," Mrs. Chen said, pointing to each phone. "Cold War habits die hard. Use them only for emergencies." She turned to Elena. "Now, you're high—" "Anna," Sarah cut in quickly. Mrs. Chen smiled. "Anna, first lesson in hiding. Walk like your feet hurt. Royalty never slouches, never drags their feet. You must unlearn grace." Elena blinked. "Unlearn grace." "Watch Sarah," Mrs. Chen instructed. "Nurses walk efficiently but not elegantly. After 12-hour shifts, they care more about comfort than appearance. For the next hour, they practiced walking, sitting, and speaking like ordinary people." Elena struggled with simple things, loading a dishwasher, making a bed, using a microwave. Each task revealed a lifetime of having everything done for her. The service entrance camera feed loops again in 10 minutes. James's voice crackled. Through a speaker. He was monitoring from a separate location, using Mrs. Chen's bridge club as cover to contact trusted former diplomats. Tommy, who had been setting up his laptop in a corner, looked up. "Mom, incoming." Sarah moved to the monitors. A black SUV was cruising past the house, moving too slowly to be casual traffic. Elena instinctively straightened her posture. "Slouch," Mrs. Chen commanded. "Feel the weight of your baby pulling you. Forward. Let your shoulders round." Elena forced herself to slump, one hand rubbing her back like Sarah had taught her. The transformation was remarkable, from royal heir to tired, pregnant woman in seconds. "Good," Mrs. Chen approved. "Now, time for your new look." She opened a closet to reveal racks of generic clothing, the kind found in any suburban mall. "My bridge club's grandchildren leave things here all the time," she said with a wink. "Very convenient." As Elena changed into leggings and an oversized sweater, Sarah studied the monitors. The SUV had parked 2 blocks away. Men in suits were going door to door, showing what appeared to be FBI badges. "They're getting bolder," Mrs. Chen observed, "using American agencies as cover." "How long before they reach here?" Eleanor asked, struggling with the unfamiliar clothes. "They won't," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Not today. Bridge Club emergency meeting. In 1 hour, 6 former ambassadors, 4 current diplomatic immunity holders, and enough witnesses to make any intrusion uncomfortable." Sarah helped Elena adjust the sweater to better hide her pregnancy. "Remember, you're grieving. Keep your eyes down, speak softly. If anyone asks, you're overwhelmed by pregnancy hormones and loss." "That part requires no acting," Elena murmured, touching the pearl necklace now concealed under her clothes. Mrs. Chen's security system chimed. "Bridge Club arrivals beginning. Places, everyone. Anna, dear, remember, you're just helping with refreshments. The less people notice you, the better." As Elena practiced walking with the servant's invisibility, Sarah caught Mrs. Chen's eye. The older woman nodded slightly. Elena was learning, adapting, surviving, but they all knew the stakes. One slip, one moment of ingrained royal bearing could betray them all. Above them, the first bridge players arrived, their chatter providing perfect cover for the drama unfolding below. Elena, now Anna, took a deep breath and picked up a serving tray, letting her shoulders slump with the weight of her new identity. Elena's cry of pain cut through the pre-dawn quiet. Sarah was at her side in seconds, medical training taking over as she helped the princess to the couch. "Talk to me," Sarah said, checking Elena's pulse. "Where does it hurt?" "Sharp pain, lower right side." Elena's face was pale, hands protectively cradling her belly. The baby. Let's find out what's happening. Sarah grabbed her medical kit, now supplemented with prenatal monitoring equipment James had acquired. The portable ultrasound machine hummed to life. Mrs. Chen appeared with warm towels and her special tea. The Bridge Club doctor is on standby. She can be here in 10 minutes if needed. Sarah moved the ultrasound wand carefully, watching the screen. The baby's heartbeat was strong, but something else caught her attention. There's some placental irregularity. Have you been taking the prenatal vitamins? When I could, Elena admitted. The last months in the palace, they controlled everything I ate, every medicine. After Marcus died, she broke off, fighting tears. Sarah understood. The princess had been living under siege even before she fled, her husband's killers controlling her environment while planning her own accident. Tommy appeared in the doorway, worry clear on his young face. "Mom, the patrol's back." Sarah glanced. At the security monitors, 2 black SUVs were parked at either end of the street. Men in suits were questioning early morning joggers, showing photos. "They're getting closer," Mrs. Chen observed. "We need to move her." "Not yet," Sarah said firmly. "Studying the ultrasound. She needs rest, proper nutrition. The stress is affecting the pregnancy." Elena tried to sit up. "I can't put you all in more danger. If they find me here—" "They won't," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "But we need a better plan than hiding. The baby will come whether we're ready or not." Sarah printed several ultrasound images, tucking them carefully into her medical records. The baby's face was clearly visible, a tiny royal heir whose very existence threatened a murderous coup. "He has Marcus's nose," Elena whispered, touching the grainy image, "and his father's chin." "He?" Sarah asked softly. Elena nodded. Marcus knew. He was so excited. He had already picked out names. Her voice broke. "He should be here." A sudden burst of radio chatter from the monitors drew their attention. The search teams were coordinating, their pattern tightening around the neighborhood. "Time to disappear," Mrs. Chen announced. She pressed a button, and panels slid closed over the window-like screens, showing the outside world. "The Bridge Club is convening early today. No one questions old ladies and their card games." Above them, right on cue, the first of Mrs. Chen's fellow players arrived. Their chatter and laughter provided perfect cover as Elena was helped to a more secure room. "Rest," Sarah instructed, setting up an IV for fluids and nutrients. "Doctor's orders." Tommy stayed with Elena, reading aloud from his favorite book to distract her. The boy had become fiercely protective of their royal guest, appointing himself her personal guardian. In the monitoring room, Sarah reviewed the medical data with growing concern. The pregnancy was more fragile than she'd initially thought. Months of stress, poor nutrition, and fear had taken their toll. "She needs a real hospital," Sarah muttered. "She needs her doctors in Valdoria," Mrs. Chen corrected, "the ones her father trusted before Richard replaced them all." Sarah's mind raced. There had to be a way to protect both mother and child while gathering the evidence needed to expose the coup. The ultrasound images seemed to stare back at her, an unborn prince, already in as much danger as his mother. James's voice crackled through their secure line. "Sarah, we have a problem. They're expanding the search grid, and they've got thermal imaging." Sarah looked at the ultrasound photos again, at the tiny face so like his father's. They were running out of time, and Elena's condition was deteriorating. Soon, they would have to choose between staying hidden and risking the baby's life. Above them, Bridge Club chatter continued, a thin veneer of normalcy over their desperate situation. In the secure room, Elena slept fitfully while Tommy kept his vigil. The future of a nation rested in the hands of a suburban nurse, a retired ambassador, and a 13-year-old boy, all chosen by fate or circumstance to protect a princess. And her unborn heir. The intercepted royal order appeared on their secure channel at 3 a.m. Mrs. Chen's diplomatic contacts had smuggled it out of Valdoria. Plans for Elena's medical evacuation back to the palace, signed by her uncle and stamped with the royal seal. They're not even hiding it anymore, Sarah muttered, scanning the document. Full authority to use any means necessary to ensure the safe return of the princess and heir. Elena sat up from her rest, face drawn with exhaustion. The seal. It's wrong. What do you mean? The imperial crown has 7 points, not 6. This was made with the old seal, the one that went missing from the treasury last year. Elena's hands trembled. The seal James asked to examine last week. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her brother's special forces connections, his convenient safe house, his increasing absences. "Tommy," she called urgently, "pack up now." Mrs. Chen was already moving, triggering hidden panels in the walls. The tunnel to the boathouse, quickly. Before they could move, the secure phone, James's direct line, buzzed. Sarah answered on speaker. "It's done." James's voice was cold, professional. "Teams are in position. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sarah. Think of Tommy." "You son of a—" Sarah bit back the curse. "How long? How long have you been working for them?" "Long enough to know this goes bigger than one princess and her conspiracy theories. There are plans in motion, deals made. The smart play is to cooperate." Elena stood, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the thumb drive. "My brother-in-law trusted the smart play too," before they cut his brake lines. A new voice came through the speaker, cultured, aristocratic, chillingly familiar from news. Reports. "Duke Richard himself. My dear niece," he purred. "Think of your child. The palace doctors are concerned about your condition." Sarah yanked the battery from the phone just as the first explosion rocked the house. "The Bridge Club's security system had been breached. Boathouse is compromised," Mrs. Chen reported, checking her monitors. "They have the perimeter. James knew all the escape routes." Tommy burst in, clutching his laptop and the medical kit. "Mom, the garage! Remember what Mr. Chen always said about his car collection?" Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. "The Prohibition Tunnel! Herbert reinforced it to move his vintage cars. It connects to the old railway service tunnel." Another explosion closer. The power flickered but held. Mrs. Chen's backup systems doing their job. Through the chaos, Sarah noticed Elena's sharp intake of breath, the way her hand clutched her side. "The baby?" she asked quietly. Elena nodded, fear mixing with determination. "Coming. Now." Perfect timing, Sarah thought grimly. She grabbed the medical kit from Tommy and helped Elena toward the hidden tunnel entrance. Above them, the sounds of breach teams entering the house grew louder. Mrs. Chen pressed a key ring into Sarah's hand. The blue Aston Martin at the end of the tunnel, diplomatic plates, bulletproof glass, Herbert's favorite toy. "Come with us," Tommy pleaded. The old ambassador's wife smiled. "My bridge club is about to have words with some very presumptuous young men about diplomatic immunity and proper manners. Go." The tunnel was narrow but solid, built to accommodate luxury cars. Tommy led the way with a flashlight while Sarah supported Elena, who was fighting contractions. "James knew," Elena gasped between pains, "about the thumb drive, about Marcus." "Save your strength," Sarah advised, but Elena gripped her arm. "Marcus sent copies to people he trusted. Insurance." Another contraction hit. "James thinks he has the only evidence, but—" A deep rumble cut her off. The tunnel shook as explosions continued above. They could hear pursuit behind them, voices echoing off the concrete walls. The Aston Martin gleamed in Tommy's flashlight beam, a deep blue monster of British engineering. Sarah helped Elena into the back seat, where she could lie down, then tossed Tommy the keys. "You're driving." "Mom, I'm 13. You're also the only one who paid attention when Mr. Chen gave his car lessons. Elena needs me to deliver this baby, and you need to get us out of here." Tommy swallowed hard, but slid behind the wheel, adjusting the seat and mirrors, just as Mr. Chen had taught him. The engine purred to life as Eleanor cried out, another contraction, closer to the last. Sarah glimpsed James in the rearview mirror, leading a team into the tunnel before Tommy hit the gas. The Aston Martin roared into the railway service tunnel as bullets pinged off its armoured hull. The heir to the Valdorian throne would be born on the run in the back of a vintage car, while a 13-year-old boy outran professional killers. Sarah checked her medical supplies and took Elena's hand. "When this is over," she promised, "I'm having a long talk with my brother about family loyalty." Elena managed a weak smile between contractions. "If we survive, I'll have him thrown in the deepest dungeon in Valdoria." "Deal," Sarah agreed as Tommy took a turn at speed, leaving their pursuers behind. Now they just had to deliver a royal, expose a conspiracy, and save a kingdom, all in a day's work for a suburban nurse. The service tunnel's emergency lights cast an eerie glow as Tommy navigated the Aston Martin through the underground maze. In the back seat, Sarah worked with focused intensity, transforming the luxury car into a makeshift delivery room. "Another contraction?" she asked, timing the intervals on her watch. Elena nodded, gripping the leather seats. "They're closer. Like, waves now?" "Tommy, keep it steady," Sarah called to the front, "and tell me what's behind us." "Two SUVs about half a mile back," Tommy reported, handling the car with surprising skill. "But they're having trouble with the turns. Mr. Chen always said British cars were made for twisty roads." A bullet pinged off the rear window, making them all jump. The bulletproof glass held, but the sound echoed through the car like a warning. "Your Highness," Sarah said firmly, meeting Elena's pain-filled eyes, "this baby is coming now. Royal protocol. We'll have to wait." Elena managed a weak laugh that turned into a groan. "I don't think my uncle's protocol manual covers giving birth in a stolen Aston Martin." Sarah spread clean medical sheets across the back seat, grateful for James's obstetric. Supplies, even if he'd provided them under false pretenses. The thought of her brother's betrayal stung, but she pushed it aside. Right now, her only priority was safely delivering this baby. "Tommy, we need somewhere to stop. The baby's crowning." "Working on it," Tommy called back, taking another turn. "With precision. There's an old maintenance station ahead. Mr. Chen showed me on the tunnel maps." The maintenance station appeared in their headlights, a concrete alcove large enough for several vehicles, partially hidden from the main tunnel. Tommy pulled in smoothly, positioning the car to shield them from view. "Kill the lights," Sarah instructed, "but keep the engine running. Elena, when I say push, you push with everything you've got." The princess was beyond speaking, focused entirely on the overwhelming task of bringing her child into the world. Sarah could hear their pursuers in the distance, engines echoing off tunnel walls. "They're searching the side passages," Tommy reported, keeping watch. "But they're being careful. They don't want to hurt the baby." "No," Eleanor gasped between contractions. "They just want to control him. Use him. Like they used Marcus." Her words cut off in another cry of pain. "Push," Sarah commanded. "Now!" Eleanor bore down as Sarah guided the baby's head. Despite the chaos, despite the danger, this moment crystallized into something pure and powerful, a new life emerging against all odds. "One more," Sarah encouraged. "He's almost here. One more push for Marcus." With a final effort, Elena brought her son into the world. The baby's first cry echoed off the tunnel walls, strong, defiant, alive. Sarah worked quickly, checking vitals, clearing airways, wrapping the newborn in a clean blanket. "He's perfect," she announced, placing him in Eleanor's arms. "A healthy prince." Elena stared at her son in wonder. "Marcus," she whispered. "Marcus James Chen." She looked up at Sarah. "For the brother who betrayed us, and the family who saved us." The moment of peace shattered as headlights swept the tunnel. Tommy tensed at the wheel. "Company," he warned. "Multiple vehicles." Sarah finished securing Elena and the baby, using the medical kit to improvise safety restraints. "How far to the tunnel exit?" 2 miles, Tommy said, "but they'll be waiting for us." Elena clutched her newborn closer. The thumb drive. Marcus didn't just send copies. He left a message in the royal vault behind our wedding portrait. Everything we need to expose, Richard, but we'll never reach it now. Sarah's mind raced. The vault, the portrait, the evidence. Tommy, your laptop. Can you still access Mrs. Chen's diplomatic channels? The boy's eyes lit up with understanding. The Bridge Club! Sarah pulled out the burner phone labeled Cardinal, Mrs. Chen's direct line. If anyone could get a message to the right people in Valdoria. The sound of squealing tires echoed through the tunnel. Their pursuers had found them. Hold that. Baby tight, Sarah ordered, sliding into the front seat. Tommy, remember what else Mr. Chen taught you about this car? Tommy's grin was equal parts terrified and excited. The red button under the gear shift. For special occasions only. I'd say this qualifies. Sarah checked that Elena and the newborn prince were secure. A royal birth and a car chase. Let's give them something to remember. Tommy pressed the red button. The Aston Martin's engine roared to life with new power, Mr. Chen's special modifications revealing themselves. As their pursuers closed in, the car shot forward into the darkness, carrying its precious cargo of royal blood and dangerous truths. Behind them, James watched. The taillights disappear and made a decision. Sometimes he realized the smart play wasn't the right one. He keyed his radio, preparing to make a call that would either doom him or redeem him. Either way, his nephew, Prince Marcus James Chen, deserved a chance at a better world than the one Duke Richard planned to build. Dawn broke over the city as the Aston Martin sat hidden in an abandoned warehouse. Elena nursed her newborn son while Sarah kept watch, the burner phone pressed to her ear. The Bridge Club sends congratulations. Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the secure line. And they've made some interesting moves in today's game. Sarah understood the code. How many players at the table? 4 ambassadors have officially requested meetings with the Valdorian delegation. Coincidentally, they're all discussing charitable foundations for children's hospitals. A pause. Your brother's team is searching the tunnel system. He's keeping them away from the north exit. So James was trying to make amends. Sarah wasn't ready to forgive, but she'd use whatever advantage they could get. Elena shifted carefully, adjusting the sleeping prince. Her fingers went to her neck, where her mother's pearl necklace had been replaced by a simple gold chain. From it hung a heavy ring bearing the royal seal, her last token of legitimate authority. The ring, Elena said suddenly. It's not just symbolic. It contains micro-engravings, authentication codes. Marcus had them added secretly after he discovered the conspiracy. Tommy looked up from his laptop. Like a digital signature? More than that. It's proof of access to the royal security system. Richard doesn't know about the upgrade. He thinks it's just the old ceremonial seal. Sarah studied the ring. Can we use it? With the right equipment. Eleanor glanced at Tommy. How good are you with computers? The boy straightened. Mum says I'm too good. That's why she took away my first laptop. He hacked his school to extend. Recess, Sarah explained, by 15 minutes. For everyone, Tommy added proudly. It was democratic. Eleanor managed a tired smile. How would you like to hack a palace instead? The next hour was a blur of technical terms Sarah barely understood. Tommy connected his laptop to Elena's ring through some kind of scanning device from his backpack. Don't ask where I got it, Mom. Elena provided passwords and security protocols while the baby slept peacefully against her chest. I'm in, Tommy announced finally, but we've only got minutes before they detect it. The wedding portrait, Elena directed. Marcus's office. There should be a safe behind it. Tommy's fingers flew over the keyboard. Got it. Downloading. Wait, someone else is accessing the system. Richard's people, Sarah asked. No, Tommy frowned. This is different. They're helping us, clearing security logs, creating distractions. Someone inside the palace is on our side. Elena leaned forward. Can you contact them? A message appeared. On Tommy's screen, the old guard stands ready. The king is being moved to safety. Await signal. General Petrov, Elena breathed. My father's most trusted advisor. Richard forced him into retirement last year, but he must have maintained his connections. The laptop chimed. Download complete. Tommy quickly disconnected the ring and erased their digital footprints. What now? Sarah asked. Elena touched her son's tiny hand. Now we use everything we have. The thumb drive, the safe's contents, the ring's authentication. We show the world what Richard really is. And the bridge club? Sarah reached for the burner phone. Tell them. Elena sat straighter, every inch a princess despite her exhaustion. Tell them it's time for tea with the king. Sarah relayed the message to Mrs. Chen, who understood immediately. The table is being set, but you'll need a proper entrance. I think I can help with that, a new voice said from the shadows. They all turned. James stood in the doorway, hands raised to show he was unarmed. Give me one reason not to shoot you, Sarah said coldly, though they both knew she had no gun. Because I was wrong, James replied. And because I know how to get you into the Valdorian embassy. Richard's men are watching the front, but they don't know about the tunnel from the old Cold War days. Why should we trust you? Tommy demanded. James looked at his nephew, his namesake, sleeping in Eleanor's arms. Because that boy deserves better than growing up in Richard's version of Valdoria, and because... He pulled out his phone, showing them a video. I've been recording everything since the beginning. Insurance, I thought. Now it's evidence. Elena studied him for a long moment, then touched her son's cheek. Marcus James Chen, she said softly, named for his father, who died protecting the truth, and for his uncle, who chose truth over safety. She met James's eyes. Don't make me regret the name. James bowed slightly, not the mocking gesture of a traitor, but the sincere acknowledgement of a soldier who had found his honor again. Sarah watched her brother, seeing the change in him. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest acts of courage came not in the moment of crisis, but in the quiet decision to make things right. The embassy, she said firmly. How do we get in? As James outlined the plan, baby Marcus stirred and opened. His eyes, the same shade of blue as the Valdorian royal flag. A prince born in exile, protected by unlikely allies, carrying the hopes of a nation in his tiny hands. The Valdorian embassy's secret war room hadn't been used since the Cold War. Now it hummed with activity, as Mrs. Chen's bridge club revealed. As a network of former intelligence operatives, coordinated with General Petrov's loyalists inside the palace. Richard's men control the main security center. General Petrov's voice crackled through the ancient radio system. But we have people in place, loyal staff, guards who remember their true oaths. Elena sat at the command table, baby Marcus sleeping, in the makeshift bassinet beside her. The embassy's staff had transformed her back into a princess, though she insisted on keeping Sarah's comfortable shoes. How many support us? More than Richard knows. The old guard never trusted him. And the younger officers, they loved Marcus. When they learn how he really died, they'll learn everything, Elena promised, touching the thumb drive now connected to Tommy's laptop. The boy worked alongside the embassy's tech team, his expertise with the palace systems proving invaluable. "Mom!" Tommy called suddenly. "You need to see this." Sarah joined her son at the computer array. Security footage played across multiple screens, palace corridors, the royal apartments, and most importantly, the medical wing where King Stefan was kept for his own protection. "Watch the doctor," Tommy pointed. "Sarah's nursing experience. Let her see what others might miss. They're keeping him drugged. See how they check the IV bags? That's not normal saline." "Can you tell what they're using?" James asked. He'd spent the last hour providing tactical information about Richard's security teams. From the king's symptoms, likely a cocktail of sedatives and antipsychotics. Enough to keep him confused and compliant, but not enough to raise suspicion. Elena's hands clenched into fists. "They're poisoning my father in plain sight." "Not for much longer," Mrs. Chen interrupted, entering with a tablet. "The Bridge Club has been busy. 4 humanitarian organizations have scheduled surprise inspections of the palace medical facilities. And," she smiled slyly, "I may have mentioned concerns about the king's health to certain tabloid reporters." "Richard will block them," James warned. "He can't block everyone," Mrs. Chen countered, "especially not when mysterious signs of royal corruption start appearing in major financial publications." Tommy grinned. "The download from the safe is already spreading. WikiLeaks, social media, even the palace's own website. They can't stop it fast enough." "And the weapons deals?" Elena asked. "General Petrov's people are documenting everything. Arms shipments, terrorist connections, money trails. It's all coming to light." A young embassy aide burst in. "Your Highness, you need to see the news!" They crowded around the television. Duke Richard's face filled the screen as he addressed reporters outside the palace. "These malicious rumors are completely unfounded," he declared smoothly. "My niece's pregnancy has caused understandable emotional distress, leading to paranoid delusions. Our only concern is her safe return and proper medical care." The broadcast cut off abruptly, replaced by security footage of Richard meeting with known arms dealers. Then more footage. The Duke ordering Marcus's brake lines cut, commanding doctors to increase the king's medication, plotting Eleanor's accident once the heir was born. "How?" James breathed. Tommy looked smug. "Remember when I said someone inside was helping us? They just hijacked the palace broadcast system. General Petrov sends his regards," the embassy aide added with a slight bow. Elena lifted her son, who blinked at her with innocent eyes. "Your father knew this day would come," she told him softly. "He left us everything we needed to make things right." "Richard's men are mobilizing," James reported, watching tactical displays. "They'll try to secure the palace, control the narrative." "Let them try," Mrs. Chen said calmly. "The Bridge Club has cards left to play." Sarah watched the chaos unfolding on multiple screens. Protesters gathering outside the palace, royal guards changing sides, reporters swarming the gates, all because she'd opened her door to a desperate stranger on a stormy night. The people know the truth now, Elena said, royal authority ringing in her voice. "It's time to take back our home." Baby Marcus chose that moment to wake, his cry echoing through the war room like a call to action. Sarah checked her medical kit. James verified his tactical gear, and Tommy backed up his files. The final phase was beginning. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow at Elena. "Shall I have the car brought around, Your Highness? I believe it's time for the princess to return to her castle." Elena nodded, holding her son close. "Yes, but this time we're going through the front door." The royal family tree stretched across the embassy's mahogany table, its branches annotated. With Tommy's careful notes, Elena traced her finger from her father's name to a notation that made her hand tremble. "It can't be," she whispered. "Father would never—" Sarah studied the documents they'd recovered from Marcus's safe. The signatures match. "Your father approved Richard's initial military contracts 3 years ago before the medications began." "He didn't just approve them," James added grimly. "He orchestrated them. The king was laying the groundwork for something bigger." Elena shook her head, but the evidence was undeniable. King Stefan had begun Valdoria's military expansion long before Richard's coup attempt. Her uncle had simply accelerated the existing plan. "The king was trying to protect Valdoria." General Petrov's voice crackled through their secure line. "He saw war coming to the region, but Richard twisted everything, turned defense into aggression." Baby Marcus stirred in his bassinet, and Elena lifted him gently. "My father, he wanted us to be strong enough to survive what's coming, but Richard used it as cover for his own deals with terrorist cells," James finished. "The king was building a shield. Richard turned it into a sword." Sarah watched Elena hold her son tighter. The princess had lost not just her husband and her crown, but now her image of her father as an innocent victim. Elena, your father was trying to protect his people. Richard is the one who perverted that intention. Tommy looked up from his laptop. There's more. The king's private servers. He left a message. For you. The video file opened, showing King Stefan in his private study. He looked tired but clear-eyed. This had been recorded before the heavy medication began. My dearest Elena, the king began. If you're seeing this, then Marcus has succeeded in protecting you, though at a terrible cost. I owe you an explanation. Elena sank into a chair, never taking her eyes from her father's image. The world is changing, Stefan continued. Our neighbors arm themselves. Extremists probe our borders. I began preparing Valdoria's defenses. But Richard, he saw an opportunity. He has corrupted everything I tried to build. The weapons that should protect our people are being sold to our enemies. The king leaned closer to the camera. I tried to stop him quietly, to shield you from this ugliness. But he discovered my investigation. The medications began, small doses at first, enough to make me doubt myself, forget conversations. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Tears rolled down Elena's cheeks as her father's. Voice grew urgent. Marcus found the truth. He was gathering evidence, preparing to expose everything. Richard must have discovered this. Now you carry not just my grandchild, but the hope of setting things right. Stefan's eyes blazed with sudden strength. You are stronger than I was, daughter. Smarter. You see people's hearts, like your mother did. Trust those who prove worthy of that trust. The king glanced over his shoulder, then quickly turned back. They're coming with more medications. Remember, Elena, the crown's real power isn't in its gold, but in the hearts of those who serve it. Richard never understood that. The video ended. Elena touched the screen where her father's face had been, then looked at the unlikely family. Gathered around her, a suburban nurse, a teenage hacker, a reformed traitor, and a bridge-playing spy master. The hearts of those who serve, she repeated softly, not out of fear or ambition, but out of choice. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. Your father chose to protect his people, even if he made mistakes. You're choosing to make it right. And we're choosing to help, Tommy added firmly. Family doesn't have to be royal to be real. Mrs. Chen entered with fresh intelligence. Richard's calling an emergency press conference. He's going to announce your father's deteriorating condition and his own assumption of the regency. Over. My dead body, Elena said, steel in her voice. That was likely his plan, James noted dryly, before we ruined it. Elena stood, lifting her son to face the ancient royal crest on the embassy wall. Your grandfather tried to protect our people, little one. Your father died exposing the truth. Now we'll finish what they started. She turned to her allies. Her chosen family. Richard thinks the crown is about power, but it's about protection. About seeing not just threats, but possibilities. She smiled at Tommy. About extending recess for everyone, not just a privileged few. Sarah checked her medical kit, already planning how to help the king recover from the months of drugging. James reviewed the palace security feeds, identifying loyal guards. Tommy's fingers flew over his keyboard, preparing to counter Richard's media narrative. Mrs. Chen made calls to her bridge club, mobilizing decades of diplomatic influence. The ancient royal family tree lay forgotten on the table, its rigid lines and formal titles meaningless compared to the living bonds of trust and courage being forged in that room. Elena had lost one family to Richard's treachery, but found another in the storm of exile. Now it was time to unite both families, royal and chosen, to save a kingdom. The diplomatic convoy left the embassy at midnight, 3 identical black vehicles with dark windows and official flags. In the middle car, Elena held her sleeping son while Sarah checked their forged documents one final time. Sarah Miller becomes Sarah Miller's cultural attaché, Sarah read quietly. Tommy is now Thomas, her precocious son accompanying her on a cultural exchange. And Anna Chen. Elena finished, a Valdorian expatriate returning home with her newborn. She touched the fake passport, marveling at its authenticity. Mrs. Chen's connections are remarkable. The bridge club plays for high stakes, James commented from the driver's seat. His own passport named him James Chen, security consultant. Tommy monitored his laptop, tracking Richard's security forces. First checkpoint in 3 minutes, palace guard, probably loyal to Richard. They'd chosen the land route deliberately. Richard's men controlled the airports, but the border crossings were still staffed by regular military, many of whom had served with General Petrov. The checkpoint loomed ahead, floodlit and bristling with weapons. James slowed their vehicle, falling into perfect diplomatic protocol. "Remember," he murmured, "we're boring, bureaucratic, beneath notice." The guard approached their window. James presented their diplomatic credentials with practiced boredom. The man peered inside, his flashlight beam sweeping over Sarah's nurse's scrubs, now accessorized with an official-looking badge. Tommy's school uniform, complete with the crest of an elite international academy, and Elena's carefully modest attire. The beam hesitated on baby Marcus. Elena held her breath, but she'd positioned him perfectly, his face turned away, just another sleeping infant. Nothing about him screamed, "Heir to the throne." "Purpose of visit?" the guard asked mechanically. "Cultural exchange program," James replied, stifling a theatrical yawn. "Educational initiatives, very dull stuff." Sarah watched the guard's face, recognizing the subtle signs. The slight softening around his eyes when he looked at the baby, the way his stance shifted from alertness to routine. They were just another diplomatic party, not worth remembering. "Dashies," guard waved them through. In the rearview mirror, they watched the other 2 convoy vehicles receive the same cursory inspection. Mrs. Chen's planning was flawless, hiding them in plain sight among legitimate diplomatic traffic. "One down," Tommy whispered, checking his laptop. 2 more checkpoints before the capital." Elena relaxed slightly, adjusting Marcus's blanket. "My uncle's men will be watching the main roads into the city. That's why we're not taking them," James said, turning onto a smaller road. "The old trade routes are barely patrolled." "Because they're dangerous," Eleanor objected. "The mountain passes are still maintained by local villagers," Sarah finished. "Mrs. Chen made some calls. Apparently the bridge club has friends everywhere." The convoy wound into the mountains as midnight deepened toward dawn. Elena pointed out landmarks, ancient monasteries, forgotten watchtowers, places where history and memory intertwined. "My mother used to bring me here," she said softly. "She believed a ruler should know the hidden paths of their kingdom, not just the grand." "Boulevard." Tommy looked up from his monitoring. Movement ahead, vehicle lights. James tensed, but Eleanor leaned forward. "Wait, flash the lights. 3 long, 2 short." He did. The response came immediately. 2 long, 3 short. Elena smiled. "Mothers. Old signal. The villagers remember." They rounded a bend to find a group of mountain farmers clearing a fallen tree from the road. The work was suspiciously well organized, the trees positioned perfect for stopping less friendly vehicles. The lead farmer approached their car, bent with age but sharp-eyed. He spoke in rapid Valdorian, which Elena answered with equal fluency. The man's weathered face broke into a smile. "He says the high passes are watching," Elena translated. "The old families haven't forgotten their oaths to the crown. Richard's men don't venture here." "The forgotten places," Sarah mused, "where real loyalty lives." They pressed on through the night, each checkpoint and challenge melting away before. Mrs. Chen's planning and Elena's knowledge of her people. The baby slept, innocent of the history being made around him. Dawn was breaking as they crested the final pass. Below them, the capital spread out like a jewel, the palace rising from its heart. Richard's sanctuary, their destination. "Home," Elena whispered to her son, "but not the way he expects us." Tommy's laptop chimed. Mrs. Chen's message. The bridge club is in position. General Petrov's forces are ready. Sarah checked her medical kit one last time, thinking of the king and the long recovery ahead. James verified his weapons, remembering his own path from betrayal to redemption. The convoy began its descent toward the city, carrying its cargo of truth and justice. Richard watched his borders and his streets, but he'd forgotten the ancient wisdom Elena's mother had taught. A kingdom's strength lies not in its walls, but in its hidden paths and faithful hearts. The ancient city map spread across the embassies. Secure Room told a story older than the palace itself. Tunnels honeycombed the ground beneath the capital, some dating back to medieval times, others added during World Wars and Cold Wars. The old city was built on secrets, Elena explained, tracing a path with her finger. These tunnels helped the royal family survive 3 invasions and 2 revolutions. And now they'll help us stop a coup, Tommy said, digitizing the map sections. On his laptop, Richard's men don't know about half these passages. Sarah studied the modern utility diagrams they'd overlaid on the ancient charts. The palace's power and water systems were modernized 10 years ago. They had to dig new service tunnels, which means recent structural surveys, James added. Ground-penetrating radar, sonar mapping, everything we need to know which routes are still stable. Elena pointed to a particular intersection. This chamber was part of the original castle. The medieval kings used it to store treasures, but my great-grandmother converted it into a bunker during World War II. It connects directly to the royal apartments and to the medical wing, Sarah noted, thinking of the drugged king. We could extract your father through here while Tommy uploads the evidence from the palace servers. A soft cry drew their attention. Marcus had awakened in his makeshift bassinet, demanding attention. Elena lifted him, and Sarah noted how naturally the princess now handled her son. No trace of royal awkwardness remained. Your first visit to the palace, Elena whispered to the baby, though not quite the homecoming we planned. Mrs. Chen entered, carrying fresh intelligence. Richard's paranoia is working in our favor. He's pulled his security forces into tight formation around the palace, leaving the old city largely unguarded. He's preparing for a frontal assault, James observed, expecting us to try something public, dramatic. Let's not disappoint him. Mrs. Chen smiled. The Bridge Club has arranged quite a distraction. Several humanitarian organizations are staging a protest about the king's medical isolation. The press will be there in force. Tommy looked up from his laptop. General Petrov's message. Loyal palace staff have mapped the guard rotations. We'll have a 15-minute window during shift change. Elena handed Marcus to Sarah and moved to the window, looking out over her city. Streetlights twinkled below, and in the distance, the palace rose like a challenge against the night sky. Marcus walked these tunnels as a boy, she said softly. He taught me their secrets during our courtship. We used to sneak away from formal functions, explore the hidden passages. She touched her wedding ring. He said a ruler should know their castle's heart, not just its face. Sarah checked her medical kit, now supplemented with antidotes for the king's drugging. How long to reach the medical wing from the bunker? 3 minutes, James replied. 5 if we encounter resistance. I've memorized the guard patterns. Once we have father, Eleanor continued, Tommy uploads the evidence from the secure servers. Mrs. Chen's diplomatic broadcast ensures it reaches every major news outlet simultaneously. And Richard, Sarah asked, will find himself facing both legal justice and public outrage, Mrs. Chen said. The Bridge Club has been very thorough in documenting his weapons deals. Several international courts are already preparing indictments. A church bell tolled midnight. In 2 hours, the guard shift would change. Elena took her son back from Sarah, holding him close. Your grandfather once told me that courage isn't about not being afraid, she said. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. She kissed Marcus's forehead. Your father understood that. So does your new family. Sarah watched her. Former patient, now her friend, her princess, her partner in revolution, transform. Steel entered Elena's spine, royal authority wrapped around her like a cloak. Yet underneath remained the woman who had fought through birth in a fleeing car, who had learned to change diapers while in hiding, who had found strength in letting go of rigid protocol. "The tunnels await, Your Highness," Mrs. Chen said formally, but with a hint of her bridge club smile. "Shall we go save your kingdom?" Tommy shouldered his laptop bag. James checked his weapons. Sarah ensured her medical supplies were secure. They moved like a family now, each understanding their role without need for commands. Below the city streets, beneath the weight of centuries, the ancient tunnels stood ready. They had sheltered kings, protected treasures, and kept secrets. Now, they would serve a new purpose, restoring justice to a throne built on trust rather than fear. Elena led the way to the tunnel entrance, her son cradled in one arm, her father's future secured by the evidence in Tommy's computer, her kingdom's fate resting on the loyalty of a makeshift family forged in storm and struggle. The true heart of Valdoria, it seemed, beat not in marble halls but in hidden places, in mountain passes and secret tunnels, in bridge club conspiracies and children's clever hands, in a nurse's healing touch and a soldier's recovered honor, and in a princess who had learned that sometimes you must lose a crown to save a kingdom. The medieval bunker's air was thick with centuries of silence. Their flashlights revealed worn stone steps and ancient wooden beams, while Tommy's thermal imaging showed modern heating ducts and electrical conduits threaded through the historical architecture. "Security feed loop is active," Tommy whispered, monitoring his laptop. "We're invisible to the cameras." James held up his hand, signaling them to freeze. Footsteps echoed through the ventilation system, guards passing overhead. Elena clutched Marcus closer, but the baby, seemingly understanding the need for stealth, remained quietly alert. Sarah checked the time. "Shift change in 4 minutes. The protest outside is drawing more guards to the perimeter." They reached a junction where modern steel met ancient stone. Elena touched a particular brick, and a panel slid silently aside. The palace's secrets, it seemed, still recognized their princess. "The medical wing is to the right," Sarah said, checking the blueprints. "The king's suite will be empty," a familiar voice interrupted. Light flooded the tunnel as Duke Richard stepped from a hidden alcove, flanked by armed men. "Did you really think I didn't know about the passages? I grew up here too, dear niece." Elena passed Marcus to Sarah in one smooth motion. "Where is my father?" "Secure, comfortable, unlike you'll be once." Richard's eyes narrowed, focusing on the baby. So the heir survived, unfortunate but manageable. Like Marcus's death was manageable. Elena's voice could have frozen flame. Tell me, uncle, did you watch the video of his crash or just read the report?" "Accidents are tragic things," Richard smiled coldly. "Just like the one you're about to have in these dangerous old tunnels. So sad, a disturbed princess, fleeing imagined threats, losing her way in the dark." "Nothing imagined about these," Tommy said clearly, his laptop screen glowing. Security footage began playing, Richard's own words damning him as he ordered Marcus's death, arranged the king's drugging, planned Elena's elimination. The Duke's smile vanished. "Destroy that computer." "Too late," James stepped forward. "It's already uploading. Every news agency, every embassy, every social media platform. Your accidents are going viral." "And the weapons deals," Elena added. "The terrorist connections, the offshore accounts. Father tried to strengthen Valdoria's defenses, but you turned our protection into a profit center." "Strength is profit," Richard snarled. "Your father was weak, seeing threats where he should have seen opportunities. Valdoria could have been a power broker, controlling the flow of arms, playing both sides, while our people became targets. Elena's royal authority filled the tunnel, while our allies turned against us. while you murdered my husband and poisoned my father? I did what was necessary. Richard's composure cracked. The old way of ruling is dead. Power isn't about protecting people, it's about controlling them. Your father never understood that. Marcus was too idealistic to see it. But you, he gestured to his men, you could still share in this new order. Think of your son's future. I am, Elena said quietly. She nodded to Tommy, who pressed a key on his laptop. Richard's own voice filled the tunnel, echoing from speakers throughout. The palace. I did what was necessary. Followed by his inadvertent confession of murder and treason, the Duke's men lowered their weapons, uncertainty crossing their faces. From above came sounds of commotion, shouts, running feet, chaos spreading through the palace. Sir, one guard said uncertainly, the protesters, they're broadcasting something on huge screens, security footage of you ordering my husband's murder, Eleanor finished. Of you plotting against the crown. Tell me, Uncle, how does it feel to be caught in someone else's accident? Richard lunged for Tommy's laptop, but James moved faster. The Duke found himself pinned against the ancient stone, his own men stepping back, distancing themselves from his fall. The king, Sarah demanded. Where is he? Safe with me, Mrs. Chen's voice came from another hidden passage. She emerged with General Petrov and a medical team supporting King Stefan between them. The bridge club decided to move up our schedule. The King was pale but clear-eyed, the drugs already fading from his system. His gaze locked onto Elena, then the baby in Sarah's arms. Father, Elena breathed. My daughter. Stefan's voice was weak but certain. My grandson, I heard his name, Marcus would be proud. Richard struggled against James's hold. The documents I forced you to sign are invalidated by proof of coercion and mental incapacity, Mrs. Chen said crisply. The diplomatic corps is quite clear on this point, as are the criminal courts. The tunnel filled with loyal guards. Richard's men surrendered without resistance, their former master's crimes laid bare. The Duke himself seemed to shrink, his power evaporating like morning mist. Take him to the secure wing, General Petrov ordered. Maximum security, no outside contact. The international courts want to speak with him about those weapons deals. As Richard was led away, Eleanor finally took her father's hands. I'm sorry. I didn't see it sooner, didn't stop him. You did exactly what you needed to do, Stefan assured her. You found allies, protected your son, proved that true power lies not in force, but in trust. He looked at the unlikely family gathered in the tunnel, in choosing to be worthy of trust. Sarah checked the king's vital signs while Tommy confirmed the evidence was spreading worldwide. James secured the passages with loyal guards as Mrs. Chen coordinated with her diplomatic network. Above them, dawn was breaking over Valdoria. The first light of a new day, shining on a kingdom saved not by force of arms, but by the strength of unlikely bonds forged in darkness and danger. The palace corridors echoed with the sound of running feet and urgent voices. On every screen, Richard's confession played in an endless loop, interspersed with security footage of his crimes. The evidence Tommy had uploaded spread through social media like wildfire, while Mrs. Chen's diplomatic contacts ensured it reached every major news outlet simultaneously. The people are gathering in Unity Square, General Petrov reported, monitoring the situation from the palace's security center. Not just protesters now, ordinary citizens. They're demanding justice. Elena stood at her father's window, watching. The crowds below. The morning sun caught the glint of phones and cameras, thousands of screens displaying Richard's treachery. They deserve to know everything, she said. No more palace secrets. Sarah was still monitoring King Stefan's vital signs as the medications slowly left his system. His blood pressure's stabilizing, but he'll need time to fully recover. Time. We may not have, James warned, entering with fresh intelligence. Richard's private security forces are gathering at the military barracks. They're trying to spin this as a coup against the legitimate government. Tommy looked up from his laptop. Not anymore. I just released the financial records. Every payment, every bribe, every illegal weapons deal. It's all public now. And the military leadership is responding, Mrs. Chen added, checking her phone. 3 generals have already denounced Richard and pledged loyalty to the crown. The others will follow. The king stirred in his chair. Elena, he called softly. The royal decree. She understood immediately. From her jacket, she withdrew an envelope bearing the true royal seal, documentation she and Marcus had prepared months ago, before his death. A new constitution, she explained to her allies, limiting the monarchy's power, establishing genuine democratic reforms. Marcus believed it was time for Valdoria to change. She touched her son's cheek. For our children to inherit a different kind of kingdom. Sarah watched the crowds growing larger on the security feeds. They're not angry, she realized. They're celebrating. It was true. The mood in Unity Square had transformed from protest to jubilation. People were embracing, sharing news on their phones, holding up children to see the palace windows. Your Highness, General Petrov said formally, the palace guard awaits your orders. Elena straightened, every inch a princess, but with the compassion of the frightened mother Sarah had first met. Open the gates, she commanded, all of them. Let our people see that we trust them as they have trusted us. The heavy palace gates swung wide. The crowd surged forward but stopped respectfully at the steps, forming a spontaneous honor guard. They want to see you, the king said. All of you, the princess who saved her people, the nurse who helped her, the boy who revealed the truth, the soldier who chose honor over orders, the diplomat who moved mountains with a bridge club. He smiled. The true defenders of Valdoria. Elena looked at her unlikely family. Together then? Sarah checked her medical kit out of habit. James surveyed the security positions. Tommy backed up his files one final time. Mrs. Chen straightened her elegant jacket. They moved as one unit now, bound by something stronger than titles or protocols. The palace balcony doors opened to a roar of welcome. Elena stepped forward with Marcus in her arms, the morning sun catching the royal seal on her ring. The crowd fell silent as she raised her hand. People of Valdoria, her voice carried clearly across Unity Square. Today we end an era of shadows and begin one of light. My son will grow up in a kingdom of laws, not secrets, of justice, not power, of trust freely given, not fear imposed. She gestured to her companions. These are the true heroes of Valdoria, not by birth or title, but by choice, by courage, by believing that doing what is right matters more than doing what is easy. The crowd's response was thunderous. Phones captured every moment as Elena presented her son as the king emerged to show he was healing, as Sarah diagnosed injuries in the crowd, as Tommy helped desperate families locate loved ones through his computer skills. In his secured cell, Richard watched his power crumble. The terrorist networks he'd cultivated were exposed. The weapons deals were unraveling. The offshore accounts were frozen. His own recorded words condemned him. But in Unity Square, a new Valdoria was being born. Citizens embraced the palace guards, who had chosen loyalty over obedience. Children played on the grand steps where protocol had once forbidden them to tread. The ancient walls rang with laughter instead of whispers. Elena held her son high, letting him feel the joy of his people. Marcus James Chen, born in flight, would grow up in a palace where doors stayed open and truth was valued above ceremony. The revolution succeeded not with bullets, but with trust, not through force, but through faith in the fundamental decency of people given the chance to choose what was right. The great hall of the palace hummed with anticipation. Where once only nobility would have gathered, now citizens from all walks of life filled the ancient chamber. Sarah watched from her place near the throne as Elena prepared to address her people, the new constitution resting on a ceremonial podium. The document's core principles came from Marcus, Elena explained quietly to her friends. Father and I merely finished what he started. King Stefan, still recovering but growing stronger daily, sat in a chair beside the throne. His eyes were clear. Now the last traces of Richard's drugs gone from his system. "My son-in-law understood what I learned too late," he said, "that a modern monarchy must earn its people's trust, not demand their obedience." Tommy, dressed in a suit that somehow managed to make him look both older and more boyish, monitored the live stream on his laptop. "Over 2 million people watching online," he reported, "plus international news coverage. The Bridge Club has ensured that certain interested parties are paying particular attention," Mrs. Chen added with a subtle smile, "especially those who participated in Richard's weapons deals." James, now officially appointed as head of royal security, gave the signal. The great doors opened, and Elena stepped forward to address her people. "Today we build a new Valdoria," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Not through force or fear, but through trust and transparency." She lifted the Constitution. "This document, born from my husband's dream and written in his blood, transforms our monarchy from an absolute power to a constitutional one." She began outlining the changes: an elected parliament with real authority, independent courts, protected rights for all citizens, strict oversight of military contracts, and transparency in royal finances. "The crown will serve the people," she declared, "not rule over them. We will be guardians of tradition but champions of progress, and we will never again let power corrupt the trust you place in us." As Elena spoke, Sarah noticed an extraordinary thing happening. The traditional barriers between royalty and citizens began dissolving. People moved closer to the throne, not in challenge, but in solidarity. A farmer stood beside a general, a student next to a duchess, all equal under the new law. King Stefan rose shakily to his feet. "I abdicate freely," he announced, "not from weakness but from wisdom. My daughter has shown us a better way to lead." He removed his crown and placed it on the podium beside the Constitution. "Let this be the last time a crown is simply inherited. Let it be earned through service." Elena signed the Constitution first, then passed the pen to representatives from every sector of society: military, clergy, business, education, labor. Each signature represented a commitment to the new partnership between crown and people. Baby Marcus, cradled in Sarah's arms, chose that moment to make his presence known with a demanding cry. The formal atmosphere broke as Elena laughed and went to tend to her son. "Even princes have to respect the people's needs," she said, drawing appreciative chuckles from the crowd, "starting with their nurses." Sarah handed over the hungry baby, remembering that stormy night when a desperate princess had appeared on her doorstep. Now here they stood in the great hall, remaking a kingdom. "The old guard is formally dissolved," General Petrov announced, "replaced by the Royal Protection Service, trained not just in security, but in constitutional law and ethical governance. And the royal archives are being digitized," Tommy added proudly. "Everything open to public access, except for current security matters. The Bridge Club will assist in international oversight," Mrs. Chen said, "to ensure that Valdoria's military capabilities are used only for defense, never for profit." James stepped forward with the final symbol of change, a simple golden key. "The palace gates will remain open," he declared. "The people's house, not a fortress." Elena took the key and held it high. "Let this be known as the day of opening," she proclaimed, "when we unlocked not just doors, but hearts and minds." The crowd erupted in cheers. The Constitution, displayed on screens throughout the palace, showed signature after signature being added, a living document growing stronger with each mark of trust. In his cell awaiting trial, Richard watched the ceremony on a small TV. His nephew-in-law's dream of a transparent, accountable monarchy was becoming reality. The weapons deals he'd planned, the power he'd hoarded, the fear he'd cultivated, all transformed into something he'd never understood: willing partnership between crown and people. But in the great hall, Eleanor held her son high, letting him feel the joy of his people. Marcus James Chen, born in flight and delivered by common hands, would grow up in a palace where doors stayed open and truth was valued above ceremony. "This is your heritage," she whispered to him. "Not gold or titles, but trust and service. The true crown jewels of Valdoria." 1 month after the day of opening, Sarah found herself in the strange position of running a medical clinic in the palace's east wing. The grand rooms that once hosted formal balls now served as examination spaces where she treated both nobility and common citizens with equal care. "Just like Marcus wanted," Eleanor said, watching Sarah teach a group of local nurses. "Breaking down walls, not just metaphorically." The princess, now regent until her son came of age, had transformed more than just the medical facilities. The palace grounds hosted public gardens, community meetings, and educational programs. Tommy's computer classes were particularly popular, teaching digital literacy to students from all backgrounds. "Mom," Tommy called from his classroom, formerly a state dining room. "Can you help? We're teaching first aid basics along with the computer stuff." Sarah entered to find Tommy leading a mixed group of students, children of diplomats, alongside kids from the city's poorest neighborhoods. On their screens, they practiced documenting medical procedures while learning practical emergency care. "Her Highness needs you both," James appeared in the doorway. "Dual citizenship ceremony in 10 minutes. They found Elena in the reformed throne room, now called the Chamber of Unity. She was preparing to grant formal dual citizenship to Sarah's family, making them officially both American and Valdorian. "A recognition," Elena explained, "of the bonds that saved our kingdom." She held up the official papers. "Though I think Marcus chose his own citizenship the day he picked his name." The baby, growing stronger daily, was fascinated by the ornate citizenship documents. His tiny hands reached for the golden seals as Mrs. Chen recorded the ceremony for the public archives. "The Bridge Club is quite pleased," she noted. "This sets an excellent precedent for international cooperation. Several other monarchies are studying our reforms." King Stefan, now serving as a senior advisor, watched from his favorite chair. His recovery had brought wisdom rather than bitterness. "We're building bridges," he said, "not just between nations, but between people." The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Sarah and Tommy received their Valdorian citizenship while retaining their American status. In return, Elena and Marcus were granted American dual citizenship, a symbolic joining of their worlds. "But that's not all," Elena announced. She unveiled a new royal decree. "We're establishing the Chen Miller Fellowship for international medical training. Sarah will oversee exchanges between Valdorian and American healthcare workers." Sarah stared at the document in surprise. "Elena, I can't." "You can," Elena insisted. "You've already proven that healing knows no borders. Now we're just making it official." Tommy received his own role. Youth Technology Advisor to the Crown, responsible for ensuring digital transparency and teaching tech skills across Valdoria. His first project would be creating a secure public portal to access government records. "Cool," he said, trying to sound casual despite his obvious pride. "But I still get to do regular kid stuff, right?" "Of course," Eleanor laughed. In fact, she nodded to James, who opened the chamber doors. A group of children poured in, sons and daughters of palace staff, local families, and even some of Richard's former supporters. All of them students in Tommy's computer classes, now also his. "Regular soccer teammates. The palace grounds make an excellent soccer field," Elena explained, though the royal gardeners are still adjusting to the idea. The formal ceremony dissolved into an impromptu celebration as children ran through halls that had once been forbidden to them. Mrs. Chen's Bridge Club ladies taught them card games, while General Petrov's officers demonstrated traditional Valdorian dances. Sarah watched her son teaching his friends both computer codes and American games, switching easily between English and Valdorian. He belonged here now, as much as he belonged in their suburban home, We'll split time between both places, Elena said, reading her thoughts. Marcus should know both his worlds, and we need your clinic in both countries. Besides, James added, somebody has to teach these kids proper soccer techniques. Their royal tutors are terrible at sports. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that had been shuttered for generations. In the palace gardens, roses planted by Elena's mother bloomed alongside vegetables grown by local families. The ancient and the new grew together, each strengthening the other. Sarah's medical kit sat beside the royal seal, Tommy's laptop next to ancient crown jewels. Like their family, these symbols of different worlds had found harmony not in erasing their differences, but in celebrating them. To think, Eleanor mused, watching her son play with his newfound friends, all of this started because you opened your door on a stormy night. No, Sarah corrected gently. It started because you were brave enough to knock. 1 year later, Sarah stood in her suburban kitchen, watching Elena prepare breakfast with practiced ease. The princess, who now insisted on being called just Elena during their American stays, had mastered the art of making pancakes while holding a discussion on international policy. The UN delegation was impressed with our medical exchange program, Elena said, flipping a perfect pancake. 3 more countries want to participate. Baby Marcus, no longer quite a baby, played with his blocks on the floor. His royal heritage showed in his bearing, but his laugh was pure childhood joy. Speaking of delegations, Sarah said, did you see Mrs. Chen's message? The Bridge Club is expanding their diplomatic oversight program. I saw they're calling it Cards for Democracy now. Elena smiled. Who knew international reform could start with a bridge game? Tommy burst in, laptop under his arm. Mom! Elena! The transparency portal just hit 1 million users. He'd grown taller over the year, but his enthusiasm remained unchanged. People are actually using it to track government spending, just like we hoped. The golden key to the palace hung on Sarah's kitchen wall, beside family photos that now included both American and Valdorian celebrations. In one, Tommy taught the Royal Guard to play baseball. In another, Sarah and Elena worked side by side in the palace clinic. James arrived through the back door, a security habit he couldn't break. The UN peacekeepers confirmed it, he reported. The last of Richard's weapons caches has been found and secured. Elena nodded, her joy tempered by remembrance. Marcus would be proud. His evidence helped stop not just Richard, but 3 other illegal arms networks. And Richard? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. Still trying to claim diplomatic immunity, James said. But the international courts aren't buying it. Too much evidence, too many witnesses. The morning news played quietly on TV, showing the latest developments from Valdoria. The palace gates remained open, with citizens freely walking the grounds. The Royal Guard had been transformed into a professional security service, trained in both protection and public service. Father's memoirs are being published next month, Elena mentioned. He's donating all proceeds to the medical exchange program. King Stefan had found new purpose in retirement, documenting the lessons learned from their near tragedy. His recovery had brought not just healing, but wisdom about power, trust, and the strength found in unlikely allies. A familiar black car pulled up outside, Mrs. Chen arriving for their weekly strategy session, which had evolved into a combination of policy discussion and family brunch. I brought the good tea, she announced, entering without ceremony. And news from the Bridge Club. The reform movement is spreading. 3 more monarchies are adopting our transparency protocols. Tommy set the table without being asked, mixing fine Valdorian china with everyday mugs. Like their family, the settings were beautifully mismatched, each piece carrying its own story. Do you ever wonder, Sarah asked as they gathered for breakfast, what would have happened if I hadn't opened the door that night? I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been brave enough to knock, Elena replied, echoing their conversation from a year ago. If I hadn't trusted a stranger with my life and my son's future. Marcus chose that moment to toddle over to Sarah, arms raised in complete trust. She lifted him easily, this child who was both prince and nephew, heir to a throne, but also part of a family built on choice rather than ceremony. The ancient prophecy was right, Mrs. Chen said mysteriously. They all turned to her. What prophecy? Tommy asked. There's an old Valdorian saying, when the crown learns to knock and common doors open to royal needs, then true power will be found in the spaces between palace and home. She sipped her tea. Of course, I might have made that up just now. The Bridge Club does love a good story. They laughed, but the truth remained. Their greatest strength had grown not from titles or authority, but from the simple human choices to help, to trust, to stand together. Outside, rain began to fall. A gentle spring shower, nothing like the storm that had first brought them together. But storms, they had learned, sometimes wash away old barriers to let new gardens grow. Sarah looked around her kitchen table, at the princess who had become a sister, the boy who had become a bridge between worlds, the brother who had found his way back to honor, the diplomat who had transformed Bridge into democracy, and the child who would grow up knowing both palace halls and suburban streets as home. Elena raised her mug in a toast. To open doors, she said simply, and to those brave enough to knock, Sarah added. Around them, two worlds continued to merge and grow, proving that the truest measure of power lies not in the height of palace walls, but in the strength of the bonds that bridge them. The end.